Well, I'm pleased to welcome the wonderful animator and director of The Red Turtle, Michael Dudok de Wit. Hello, nice of
Hi, Yvonne.
you to join.
Hi.
Well, we've just been watching this wonderful film, and I'm curious to know what the inspiration was for this animation.
Gosh, so many, but there's this archetypal story of Robinson Crusoe, of course, which you also find in other, I mean, much older than Daniel Defoe's book. And actually, you and I, we laughed about the
Oh
detail
yeah,
because we, as both
yeah.
as children, we saw a TV series called Robinson Crusoe, French made with Robinson being a German actor, and I was mesmerized by that. Totally, I it was probably the first series I saw in my life, and I needed to live what he lived. Um, why? Because there's something very pure about Alone in Nature. First of all, the relationship with nature, but also your identity. Who are you really? What when you don't have society to reflect you? And that I found that very interesting for the Red Turtle. When the producers asked me to write down a letter of intention, basically saying why do I want to make the film. It's a standard procedure for them, but also possibly later for the press if necessary. I wrote. I'm a storyteller. I just want to tell a story. I mean, that gives such profound satisfaction when people are listening to your story. Secondly, it may sound a bit naff, but I want to explore beauty. I love beauty in all its forms, in music, in visual beauty, and so on. And as someone who draws, who paints, just to push your limits about the aesthetics of what you're doing, I find deeply appealing, and I'm talking for many of my colleagues too. And thirdly, is my deep respect for nature, which is not simply for animals and plants, that obviously for beautiful sunsets, etc., but for all nature, including the violent side of nature, including the cycle of life and death, including the rain, the night, storms, etc. And it's so total in my life. I grew up with a lot of nature, with a lot of animals. But it's so total that the ambition to somehow express that feeling in a film without being like preachy about it, but just to translate my feeling into a film, I thought, wouldn't that be my ultimate satisfaction to be able to do that? So those three motivated me to make the Red Turtle.
So you saying that this was a kind of a long-held dream project for you?
Exactly. Only for a short film, I was a short filmmaker, and for a short film, the theme is too big. So it was not a reality for me. I wrote a script ages ago in the 90s, but quickly saw that it was not going anywhere. Then I got very, very, very unexpectedly an invitation from Studio Ghibli in Tokyo, saying, and everybody knows their films, of course, I adore their films. And the letter said, we like your short film called Father and Daughter a lot. They made the ultimate compliment. They said we see it as a Japanese film. Have you thought about making a feature film? Because if you are, we would love to be the producer or the co-producer together with our partner Wild Bunch in Paris, their distributor. And that invitation was instantly I said yes. And that suddenly made me realize my old dream to explore this theme of being alone in nature. Now this is the chance to make it reality, to really to express that in a feature film.
So, how much with Studio Ghibli and your artwork? Is there many similarities with it, with your style and their style? Do you think?
Yes and no. There are some. Obviously, they have a look, even if they have different directors, Miyazaki, Takata, and others. Um, they have a look. And actually, one of my first questions was, do you mean you want me to come to Tokyo to make the film? They said, no, it will be a European film. You make it in Europe. And I said, do you want me to be a film with the Studio Ghibli look, including the movements in the animation, which are very Japanese? And again, they said, no, you design it and you make it with European animators, particularly French animators, because their co-producer was French. So the inspiration I got from their films is that they are commercially strong, or strong enough. So they are mainstream in a way. They are made for a large audience, but they are at the same time fiercely individualistic, some more than others. But someone like Miyazaki, he comes from a very personal place and is confident to express that, even if the story is not structured the way we like it, very, very tight. It's very loose. But there are symbols in there and there are feelings in there which we recognize as being very authentic. And I would say coming from the early part of his life. Not that his film is about his childhood or are about his childhood, but he recognizes the purity of the feelings of a child, which we keep all our lives, but it gets muddled with other things. And that I recognize, that purity, that passion, that innocence of looking at things with amazement. Miyazaki is good at that. Takahata has other qualities that I found that we have in common. Then their respect for nature is obvious in many of their films. They're a bit animistic culturally, the Japanese. And when you go there, you feel that by osmosis. I've got an animistic side. I quickly have to explain. Animism is sometimes seeing fairies and so on, and seeing spirits in trees. I'm a modern animist, where totally acknowledging that you can separate life between dead matter and live matter. In other words, plants, rocks, and so on one side, and plants and animals on the other side. I totally acknowledge that. I'm a gardener, and for God's sake. But on a more subtle level, for me, all nature is alive through and through. So I don't see spirits in stones. That's kind of humanizing the animism. I just have a sense of the liveness of everything. And I find you see that when you travel also in other cultures, and I find that very, very attractive, but it's subtle. So in a way that I feel inspired by the Japanese films in general, but certainly animation. And that motivated me greatly to make the Red Turtle.
So how much is it hand drawn? Is much of it hand drawn? Or it looks very hand-drawn, doesn't it? And the backgrounds are very distinctive as well. There's detail, and yet there's no detail. It's quite an interesting paradox.
Nice. Thank you. It's almost the way I describe it too. Be very detailed. Embrace complexity, the beauty of complexity, but see the underlying simplicity behind it. In my work and in life in general. It's hand-drawn, and we use a Cintiq and animation software called TV Paint. So you draw on a Cintiq. You see, you're as if you're holding an ordinary pencil, but it's a digital line. That's one of the most common tools nowadays, and I thought it was excellent. It allowed me as a director, to make changes very quickly all the time. Without completely turning back the wheels and going through the whole process again. A few things were digital animation, computer animation, and one of them was the turtle, or all turtles were computer animated. Why? Because bizarrely, those animals are just incredibly difficult to draw, full stop. I'm talking from experience. And because of the subtle curves, and they are hard shape, but they're also soft, and none of the curves are really perfect. They're kind of, etc. And then therefore they're also very, very hard to animate. So there was one guy, Dominique. He specialized in building the turtle, in a CG turtle, and animating the CG turtles. also turtles, when they turn slowly in perspective, they have to be really, really solid. If you hand draw that, you get lost. You have to spend three times more time on your drawings, and the results may still not be good. So I used the classic approach. It's hand drawn, but a few bits and pieces benefit from computer animation more. So they were integrated in a style. They were made to look like hand drawn with an outline and with graphite texture, etc.
The visuals are stunning, but the audio is amazing as well. The sound design, there's a lot of detail there, isn't there? It's really immersive, and the music really complements that. It's not overdone. How was the process of the sound work? How did you create it? And at what point did you build up those layers?
I had a huge challenge because with my short films, one of the main muses for me, the main inspirations for me, is the actual music. And I start a short film only when I know what the music will be. Not in detail, but the melody and the choice of instruments and the emotions of the music. That worked very well. I have the music. Oh my God, this is exactly what I need. And it's almost like it's guiding me to animate. With the Red Turtle, it didn't work like that at all. I didn't know what kind of music it required. And I thought it will come, don't be impatient. It didn't come. So we started production, we started animating without music. I had a composer, we talked a lot, he was great, and his collaborator, but it didn't work out. He was not the right one, simply because the music didn't feel right, and something did not connect. That made me very wary, and it was quite late in production that we started to seriously looking for the composer, and I got about 12 candidates who made proposals. Some of them established musicians, some of them not. In France, because the budget determined that it had to be spent in France, the music budget. And importantly, one stood out because he made a demo which was really beautiful and very pure. But I was tense because I thought I have to meet him. There must be a chemistry between us, because otherwise you can talk for days and laugh and enjoy it, but you're not connecting. And luckily, it immediately became clear that he was highly intuitive, listening to the priorities very well, etc. So we got on. And my brief to him was not non-stop music for this film. There have to be many, many pauses without music because of the nature of the story. He asked me, do you want the music to be descriptive or otherwise? And he meant that, does the music amplify the emotion that we see, or does the music say something else as well, or instead? And that was an interesting question. I had not thought about that. And the conclusion was sometimes descriptive and sometimes giving a new dimension to what we see. And he surprised me wonderfully with that angle. He understood the silences very well, very, very well. So he played around that, and he respected the moments of silence. This is a particularly silent film because it has no dialogue. That was a conscious choice. Part of the film, the first part of the film, is very clearly a single protagonist in nature, and he doesn't talk to himself, so the absence of dialogue is natural. But it became the style of the film, making the film slightly, in my eyes, slightly more mythological, which is a good thing, in my eyes. So what happens then? The sound effects come forward a lot, and there are permanent sound effects in nature all the time. You know, the surf of the sea, the birds, the breeze in the bamboos, and so on. And my brief to the sound designers, a company in Paris, was no cartoony sounds, keep it natural. And there are no cartoony things in the film at all. The funniest creatures are crabs, but they are natural. They are like that. They don't have to be cartoony because they are already naturally funny. And they understood brief very well. I had recorded the sound of a particular pigeon in the tropics because I did my research on a tropical island in the Indian Ocean, and there was one wood tropical pigeon, a jungle pigeon. I forgot its name. It had a local name, and it was singing every day. So it became part of the fixed atmosphere, a bit like the ticking of a clock in your house. And I loved it because it was a very pleasant sound. So I gave that to the sound designers, and they liked it and they used it, and a few other bits. But it's basically the sound designers who proposed things. And one final thing about music, the music composer and the sound designers work together, which is apparently not always the case, because the sound can be in conflict with the music, especially when you have, for instance, a very high flute or a very high violin, and you also hear the sound of the screeching of birds. The two can contradict each other or suppress each other. And so they literally work together to attune the frequency, or to subdue one and bring up the other, etc. That I found really well chosen, because the musician sees sounds as music and the sound designer sees music as a sound effect, and that's how it is.
So you were saying that you did a bit of research. Does that mean you stranded yourself on a desert island? Did you do your own Robinson Crusoe thing?
To be honest, I toyed with the idea. I toyed with the idea. No, I didn't. I toyed with the idea because, to be honest, it's very emotional to be lost from your society. Because I did research from accounts, and there are quite a lot of accounts, and people really go mad from loneliness. It's very, very challenging. It's not at all a pretty tropical beach, paradise, etc., like you see in holiday brochures. So no, I didn't. I went to a small island as part of the Seychelles group. It had inhabitants, it had shops, it had one road and a couple of cars, and I stayed with local people, and I walked around day and night. I took millions of photos. And I made it experiential. What does it feel like to be standing in the rain there? Not here in the UK, but there. What do I hear at night? What do I see at night when there's no artificial light, etc., etc. So typically, one thing I noticed is when you're near the sea, and especially when you're on an island with a hill, you keep looking at the horizon. It's such a present. It's such a simple, pure, and magnetic presence. And when you stand on top of a hill and you see the horizon there, and on your left and on your right and behind you, that's really special. So the film reflects that. It's subtle. It's not a message or anything, but the film reflects that the horizon is there all the time. I've kept the horizon horizontal because you can tilt it because your head is tilted, etc. But I like the stability of the horizon. So that's one typical detail. At one point, I had a flu because I'd pushed myself before going to that island, so I was exhausted and I had a flu. I was a little bit feverish and hallucinating a little bit at night, also being out of my comfort zone. And that was interesting. What happens when you're slightly hallucinating because you're surrounded by nature? At night you hear sounds you've never heard before. That works on you. And again, I could use that in the film.
Yeah, because drawing this conversation to a close, it's interesting that you didn't kind of get bogged down in how does a man survive, building a shelter, kind of in the Ray Mears, wilderness survival thing, has to do this, has to do that. It was much more about the environment that he finds himself in and that emotion, which is quite incredible because of the fact there's no dialogue. And yet you kind of experience it, the senses of that isolation. It's quite extraordinary.
Thank you. Now, I've noticed because some journalists, in fact, many journalists have asked me, amazing, no dialogue, incredible, how do you express things? I think people forget that verbal language is just one of the languages. We speak with movement, we speak with color, obviously with music. We filmmakers, we speak with choreography, with the editing. Editing is highly expressive, with the design, etc. All those are language modes. I've at one point sat down and I counted them all, and I came to 13. They all speak. So dialogue is one of the 13. Dialogue is absolutely not essential. How do we know? You go to an animation festival where you see short films, and a huge percentage of the short films has no dialogue, because the film doesn't need dialogue. The other languages are very, very strong. And dialogue can also kind of pull you out of a film, because you see a character that speaks like that, but your ears hear already the education, the social class, maybe the region, because we are very, very sensitive to the language. So, and that can contradict with the character that you are seeing. So it pulls you away from the character instead of being more empathetic towards the character.
That's really interesting, actually. And I mean, that's the great universal appeal of animation when it has no dialogue like that. It crosses boundaries, it crosses language barriers, and everyone can kind of empathize almost immediately, can't they, with the characters?
Yes.
So do you have any advice for aspiring animators? Because it's a wonderful world to work in, maybe.
Okay. One thing is there's so many directions you can go in animation. It's such a vast group. But if you are aspiring to be a storyteller, like many short filmmakers are, and an independent creator, because you have a vision that you want to fulfill rather than someone asking you to do something. I would say one thing actually, which worked for me hugely and continues working for me, is occasionally, not all the time of course, but occasionally ask yourself the really big existential questions, like simply the question, what do I want more than anything else? Not superficially, but deeply. What do I want to achieve? Or what is my real originality? Why am I really original? Because obviously we imitate a lot, we emulate, etc., and that's fine, and you can't make a film without doing that. But somewhere we have something that's authentic. What is that? Where is that coming from? Or how does it show? Questions like that. And that includes questions, is this the right path? Should I leave animation, or should I go into another aspect of the animation industry? Which is sometimes maybe not a pleasant question. I've looked at that a lot. I've really toyed with the idea of leaving the industry at several occasions. And in a way, that has been extremely healthy, because then you start looking at what are the priorities.
Mm. And what are you working on at the moment? Have you got any new plans in illustration or animation?
The making a feature film, it took me 9 years solid. Making that feature film, because I worked about 5 years on the development. And when I say work, I mean, like many animators, you don't work 40 or 50 hours a week, much more than that, non-stop, all the time, year after year. I'm not saying this with a complaining attitude, because it's your choice, and you're passionate, so you don't count the hours in that sense. But it was very, very, very tough physically. The exhaustion was tough, and the doubt, the relentless doubt, is this really right? Am I in the right direction? And so on. Because don't forget, a project may be pulled away from you at any moment, and until you're really deeply into it with the whole team. Because producers may say, we are worried that's not going to work. We've decided to stop supporting you financially to do this project. So I was worried about that, because the film is fragile, which is its beauty, but it's its danger also. So would I make another feature film? Actually, yes, because it's just utterly amazing, and what you're learning, and to work intimately with a whole group of artists, where not for a few months like I did with commercials, but where you're together year after year. Now, do I have a story? Because I tend to make films based on my own stories. I don't have one, so I'm still waiting. I've got fragments which are really, really very attractive that I want to create. But until I have something that at least indicates where the film is going and how it's finishing, and I don't want to commit. And I get regularly people sending me books or scripts saying, Michael, this is the story for you. You should look at this. And I'm actually very, very, very choosy. I can be choosy because I've got short films I want to make also. And every time I see straight away that it's not for me. I'm not an all-rounder. And I greatly admire people who are, and it shows. And Miyazaki and Takata were much more adaptable than I was. So right now I'm not making feature. I've just started a short film. I've illustrated a book. I've written articles and etc. And that's very fulfilling. And interestingly, the experience of making a feature pushed my limits so much all the time. I had to learn all the time, things that I was good at, I thought I was really good at. I had to relearn about them and so on. That I noticed that I had an audience, that there were people who were interested to hear about that. So I've given quite a few masterclasses internationally about, basically about creativity and intuition and timing and the feeling of the story and things like that. And that gives me a lot of fulfillment to be able to share that.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. And I think with all your animations, you can watch them over and over again and still get something out of them. And they're really wonderful, wonderful things. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And best of luck with the next projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Yvonne.